So I wanted to take you through what it looks like when you're planning what type of livestock to get and your livestock needs for a year. So it's going to depend obviously on a few different factors. One, how much space you have, especially if you are not living rurally, but you have an HOA or maybe some different city ordinances on what you're going to be able to raise. Also depends on how much time and effort you are going to be wanting to put in to get that food. So we're going to start out with kind of the smaller animals and work our way up, and I'll also be sharing with you how much we do of each of those to provide my family with a year's worth of food and kind of what that workload looks like. So first up, of course, is chickens. And chickens, people like to say, are the gateway animal. I have to tell you though, we actually started with cows, but chickens are great because you've got obviously during the most part of the year, you're going to get an egg a day from your chicken. So you're getting something daily from them to feed your family. They're also small. Many times you can even raise them in a backyard environment. So they can work really great for that. Now, of course, here I have got in this coop, which is a combination of a chicken tractor and coop in one. So I move this every few days across our pasture. So that means my chickens are having the benefits of being free range. So they're moving over our pasture, fertilizing it, scratching it up, and that works out really great. And they're being protected from predators. We live out really rurally. There's our dog, there's neighborhood dogs, but mainly we have a lot of coyotes. We do have bear here, occasionally cougar, bobcats, that type of thing. The coyotes are our main predator. We also have eagles. So I do not free range my chickens because I've lost too many in the past and I keep them there. Now in this particular coop, I have 6 chickens and these are my main laying hens. And right now, because we're in the middle of winter, I'm not getting a ton of eggs. From these 6 hens, I'm probably only getting about 6 eggs a week right now. I'm getting about an egg a day, maybe a little bit less. But in the summertime, I get an egg a day from all of them. So there's different coops. You can raise just a couple of them. And then I also have another movable coop that I've got a rooster in with 2 other laying hens, and that's over here. And this coop, if you watched my video on meat birds, raising our meat birds, this is what we keep our meat birds in. So of course with your chickens, you've got your eggs, but you also have the option of raising chickens for meat. So we do meat birds in the springtime. So I like to get my meat birds in. We usually raise them to about 8 to 10 weeks. So I don't have them for a very long period of time, which I like. We usually get them in the first part of May, and then I like to be butchered by the first part of July. Now, part of the reason for that is because I don't want to be dealing with butchering in the hot part of summer. Meat birds also, during the really hot spells, they're more prone to heat stroke and other things like that than your regular hens are. So for those reasons, I like to be done before the heat of summer. But it's great because for 8 weeks worth of time, I've got a year's worth of chicken. So we raise 25 whole chickens for my family of 4 in combination with all of the other livestock that we raise for meat. That takes us through a whole year with our chicken. Now, I will be totally upfront with you. There are occasional times where I want just some wings or just some breasts for chicken, and I will buy some organic chicken from the store, but usually it's only a couple of times a year. Predominantly, we're just eating those whole chickens. So again, the meat birds, you can have only an 8 weeks worth time of investment. This is the coop we keep them in. We can move them around the pasture once they get bigger, but you can do it in a pretty relatively small area. Then you've got your hens for your daily eggs, and you can do dual purpose breeds. We don't currently, where you raise some of them from eggs. They take longer to reach butchering size, and you can butcher some of them from meat. But I feel like this is an option if you have a small amount of space you can do without a huge amount of investment. Now, up next, we have our pigs. So obviously it depends on if you eat pork or not. We do eat pork. I know people have very differing opinions on that, so we'll just leave that where it lies. Here, this year is our first year raising American Guinea hogs. And you can see this is the section of pasture that we have them in, which they're actually getting butchered in a week from now. They're almost to butchering. And we will raise pigs usually not every year, we usually do every other year. It kind of depends on how much meat we have from other sources, and we kind of evaluate. So we'll look right now, I know I'm getting ready, I know about how much meat I'm gonna get from these, and then we'll decide if we're gonna get any more piglets or not to butcher for next year. So we've got 5 of these guys. We're doing some for some family members as well. This is my first year with the American Guinea hogs, and I will say that compared to the Hereford pigs that we've done in the past, I love the temperament of these guys. They are so sweet. They are so good-natured. They're very curious, but they're very docile. Whereas the Hereford pigs, when they get up to be this size, they are a lot more, when you come with the food, you best not plan on falling. They'll take you out and they will really come in. These guys are a lot easier to take care of in that aspect, but we've had these pigs almost, let's see, they're gonna be at about 10 months when we butcher them. The Hereford pigs, we butcher at 6 months. So we've had these guys almost twice as long, which means twice the amount of food, twice the amount of time that we're caring for them. And so now we're caring for them throughout the winter months when the weather's a lot worse. So, and we're not gonna get as much meat off of them. These guys are not as large as the Herefords would be at butcher time. So we're kind of weighing if we're gonna do this breed again. We'll definitely do pigs again, but we're weighing if we're gonna do this breed based upon the cost it's taking us to raise them, as well as the time investment. And I have to say, it's kind of nice in the middle of winter to only have to deal with the laying hens and our cattle and not the daily feeding. And we're feeding more in the winter because it takes more for these guys to keep warm. So we're actually, not only are we feeding them longer, we're feeding them more. So that we're kind of going back and forth with whether or not we'll do this particular breed or not. But as you can see, this is a pretty good size space. Now, of course, this is for 5 pigs. If you were doing just 1 pig, you wouldn't need to have as large of space. But the fencing when it comes to pigs is a lot more important than it is if you're doing something like chickens. So you can see the cost of the fence here. We have got these panels that go all the way around, and we've got the metal T-posts. And we also have an electric fence around the bottom. If you do not have electric fence around the bottom with pigs, they will root out underneath your fencing. And if you want an adventure, let your pigs get out and then have fun chasing them. I like adventure, but not like that. So I highly recommend having a good electric fence. Like I said, just that strand around the bottom will keep them in. And then they also do need some type of shelter. So you can see we've got a shelter there. We put a lot of straw in there. They can get underneath the straw and keep warm that way, as well as have a place to get dry and to get in out of the weather. And then we've got a watering source. So those are some things to consider. It was more infrastructure and more cost up front for us to buy all of this and then actually make this section of the pasture off for them than it would be for something like the chickens. So you definitely want to consider that. That we have an electric source and our pump house, which is where electric source and water comes from, kind of like looking at where you're going to be putting these things in. Now, we do not currently have goats or sheep. Now, goats or sheep are going to be your next item up as far as size. Like for pigs, they don't require as much space or as much acreage as you would for your cattle. But we had goats in the past that were not dairy goats. We got them when we first purchased this property and we're clearing it. And I gotta tell you, goats like to get out as well, and they can be a little bit ornery. We had some male goats that we got just to clear brush. They will eat back the blackberry vines and brush, but they don't really kill them. Ours came back. But they did help to clear it out some areas for us when we didn't have a tractor and we needed to get some stuff cleared out. You can see blackberry vines just kind of come up all over here. They're a noxious weed. They're really hard to eradicate. So we just kind of try to keep them at bay. So I don't have very much experience with goats. A dairy goat someday would be something we may look at if we don't do a dairy cow. But I don't have a lot of advice to give you on that, except make sure you have an amazing fence for goats, because they're Houdinis and they most likely will get out. So with cattle, you're obviously going to need more space, right? They're a bigger animal and they're going to require more acreage. However, if you don't have acreage and you still want to raise cattle, my brother raises his own beef cattle and has a really decent sized herd, much bigger than our herd. And he instead leases property and has a deal with different landowners, and he has his herd and has had a large herd for a number of years without having his own acreage. So there are ways to do it, even if you aren't living in an ideal spot. It'll take a little bit more work. So one of the nice things about a cow, though, is it's a large animal, right? And so if you butcher one cow, depending upon your family size, one cow may feed you for a year, it may feed you for 2 years. So for our family of 4, in addition with we're raising the pigs, so we have a pig every year, every other year. We have our meat chickens, and then we also go crabbing in the summer and we catch about a year's worth of crab. We also have some salmon, and then with the beef, a half to a quarter cow, my size family of 4 with the age that my kids are at, that half a cow will feed us for a year. So a whole cow would actually feed us for 2 years. So again, it's just going to kind of vary on what other foods you're eating and how large your family size is. But that means I've got one animal that feeds almost my whole family for a full year, if not more, which is a pretty good return on investment. But you are going to need to have some acreage, especially if you don't want to feed all year long, which is really going to, we don't want to feed all year long because one, it's a lot more expensive. So here with our growing season, when we have fresh pasture, the average rule of thumb is an acre per large animal like a cow. Now, if you live in an area that doesn't get as much rainfall as we do, that may be 2 acres. If you live in a really dry, southern, arid type climate, then you're gonna need a lot more acreage per animal in order to have enough pasture to avoid feeding them year round. So we are only grass fed. So they are on pasture and eating grass, usually through the end of April, beginning of May, through about October. So about half the year we're not feeding, the rest half of the year we are feeding. So right now, obviously we're feeding, they've got some hay out there right now. And so our goal is to have them on pasture as long as possible. The other thing with the cattle are you've got to have good fences. And that's kind of true with any livestock, is you really need to have good fencing, because this depends on where you live. If you live in an area that has open range, then this isn't true. But where we live, there is no open range. And if your livestock gets out and is on the road or someone else's property and causes damage or a car wreck or something like that, then you're liable. So we take our fences very seriously. We do barbed wire. We have too many acres. Our herd of cattle right now, we're at 6. And so we have a lot of acreage that is fenced in. For our acreage, they're on 12 of our acres. Not all of it is pasture though. About 6 of those acres is wooded. So it doesn't have a lot of grass, but a little bit, but that's still fenced in for them. And so you can imagine we would never run an electric fence on 12 acres worth of pasture. So we use barbed wire with metal fence posts and stays. And also with electric fencing, to doing that much, we have a lot of brush that grows here. And so when the brush grows up, which is something we have to really be on top of with the pigs, but it's a smaller area, so it's doable, is if you get a lot of grass growing up or a lot of weeds or a lot of brush and it touches that wire, it can ground it out or disrupt it. And then you've got areas that there's not actually any electric going to. And so it's a lot more upkeep. So if you have a good fence in, that's really key, and good pasture land for your cattle. They don't have to have shelter, so you don't have to have a barn for cattle. If you have a lot of bad weather, they are going to need some places to get in out of the weather, but here we've got some of our evergreens. So you can see we've got an evergreen tree there, and we actually have their feeder underneath it. And so that way, if it's really heavy rain or we were to get snow, they've got an area that they can eat and get under, and it's going to provide some protection. We also have some natural hills here. So we get what, in the winter months especially, we get what they call a northeasterner. Comes out of the northeast, out of the Fraser River Valley, actually up in Canada, and it filters down. And it's a really cold, frigid wind, and it'll blow across. So when that happens, the cows will actually come down along this bank and snug in right up against it. And so then the wind goes over their back. So you can look at your property, and there's likely areas, and the cows will naturally find them, that do offer areas of protection if you don't happen to have a barn or a run-in shed. And of course you can build those sheds and that type of thing, but when you have really large herds, which we only have a herd of 6, it's not a large herd by any means, but when you've got, cattle's up in the hundreds, if not bigger, like some of the larger operations do, if not in the thousands, all their cows are not going into barns and sheds. And so they will do just fine, provided they've got some areas that they can find shelter. So as far as your cost, when you're buying a cow, your cow is going to cost more than a pig. Your pig is going to cost more than a chicken, but you're getting a lot more meat. And for the amount of work with the cattle, they actually probably are the least amount of everyday hands-on work, because we're just making sure that the water tanks are full every day with the hose. And then during the summer months, we're not feeding at all. So it's just making sure that the fences are in good shape and, keeping an eye on them. And then in the wintertime, we feed the big round bales. And so we're still not feeding daily. We'll put a round bale out and it lasts for these guys right now with their size and the amount of cows we have, those round bales will last, they're about a half a ton. They'll last about 3 to 4 days. So we're only actually feeding every 3 to 4 days. It's not a daily feeding maintenance. So it feels like that the pigs are a lot more work because we're out there with them every single day, taking them their food and that type of thing. So there's also that to consider. But like I said, for the amount of work and the cost, it really feels like the cattle for us are the least amount of daily work if you take it into, like for the whole year, and you're getting a lot more meat for that effort. But yes, you do have to have more space. So looking at the space that you have, the amount of money that you want to put into it up front, for the cost of the animal, the infrastructure that they're going to require, that can give you some good guidelines to look at. So for what we do, as I said, we have, I have got 8 laying hens, so that's usually an egg per day during the summer, and it obviously slacks off quite a bit in the winter months. We do 25 meat chickens for a year. We do 1 whole pig for a year, usually, and then we do a half a cow for a year. So for my family of 4, that feeds us for a year. So just some things to consider. And then sometimes we'll decide, not to do pigs for a year because we've got enough meat that we don't need to do another pig. And even same thing with the cows. We may have a year where we decide, we've got enough meat. We don't need to butcher this year. We can breed or we can sell the cow. Lots of different options. So I hope that you found this helpful. If you're also curious about how we go crabbing and get a year's worth of crab in our little ski boat, just with little crab pots, you can watch that video. And then I also have how much to plant per person for a year's worth of food when you're looking at your vegetable garden.